Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to IQT, Infrastructure Question Time. I'm Adrian Ellison, you know me from this morning, and with me on the panel this afternoon, two of my panellists probably don't need much of an introduction because you've just heard them speak. But we have, from my immediate right, we have Richard Ray, who is the Enterprise System Management Team Manager at Southampton University. Richard told me earlier that he'd been in the corporate sector and then moved to consultancy. He decided to come to Southampton before it killed him.
Pretty much, yeah. Here for a break, apparently.
Gary Rawlins. Gary is the account director at Q Associates and has for about the last 20 years been working with the education and research community in a number of different roles. He also told me at lunchtime that he plays the harmonica. And some of you, if you get a bit bored with this, can check him out on YouTube, I believe. Next to Gary, we have, and you've just heard her fantastic talk about the move to the Azure cloud. We have Alison Phillips, so welcome Alison from Staffordshire. And last but by no means least, an old hand to IQT, Paula Vickers. Paula is Pro Vice-Chancellor and Director of IT at Middlesex. And I'm hoping, Paula, that you'll be able to challenge us in the way that only you are able to do this afternoon. So, without further ado, we will get on to our first question. Now, normally I throw this to the audience, but I thought, in a sense of trying to get our panellists to think about the conference theme, which is, are we agile or fragile? And with a particular reference to Alistair from Huddersfield's talk this morning on skeletons in your closet. Gary, what are your skeletons?
Well, thanks very much. For those of you that don't know Q Associates, we're an IT transformation organisation. So, as you can imagine, our internal IT systems are pretty damn perfect. Thank you for that. In my head I had a pause for applause, and I'm thinking, yeah, if that doesn't come, I'm going to look awkward. In reality, they do say never buy a house from a builder, don't they? But the challenge that we have as a business is unstructured data. Because we're a small business, and everything that we do is done on a file basis. And it came to a head recently where the team that run our compliance successfully delivering the ISO 27001 accreditation and the Cyber Essentials accreditation turned their eyes to GDPR. At the same time that our new technical services director wanted to bring in a whole lot of new CVs and look at recruiting engineers. So we had this clash of two sets of organisations, people within the organisation, people wanting to restrict the amount of personal data that's brought into the business in an unstructured way, and someone wanted to bring in lots of unstructured information so they could look at the broadest possible scope of new talent to bring into the business. We haven't solved the problem yet. You'll be interested to hear, but it's an ongoing challenge for us in terms of how you marry up the business processes that are around creating unstructured data that are sat in the business and the compliance and regulations that go with it. So that's where we are. Skeleton for me.
Okay. Paula, have you got any skeletons in your closet?
They're not skeletons, sadly, they're alive. And they don't seem to know when not to give away their user ID and password. So it doesn't really matter how much money we chuck at the problem. They actually keep answering emails that they absolutely shouldn't. And for me, this last year I'm going to talk tomorrow about our move to a private cloud, but that has been so smooth and so easy, but trying to stop staff responding to rubbish emails it is the work of Hercules. It is horrible and it is ongoing and it is very painful.
I think we've all got that skeleton or live people, as you say, in our organisations. I know I certainly do. Richard, skeletons?
Right here, Q Associates.
Thanks very much. I'm not your account manager. You can say that.
So many skeletons, such a big environment. I'm going to go more for the legacy system. So a few years ago, we decided to standardize everything and use central controls. So herd versus pets. Pets, you pick them up, you scratch them, you pick them, you keep them more happy, pop them back down, pick up the next one. You can do that with a certain amount of servers. You can't do it with 2,500. So when we started the standardization, the pets were left in a corner, still being picked up, scratched and stroked, and the herd was moving forward. Unfortunately, the pets are still around. We can need to change them into a herd at some point or another.
Okay.
And no, it's not finished yet.
Alison, what are your skeletons?
Yeah, and our closet was probably as big as like Microsoft's data center. We had lots of skeletons. We got rid of a lot, which has been good, but we've still got some. I think one of the issues we've got is, like people go straight to technology, and I think Alistair mentioned that. It's straight away, we've got a business problem, let's have one of them and that'll fix it. It's not like, what are we trying to fix? So I think that's one of our skeletons.
Again, I suspect we've all got that skeleton in our closet. So thank you very much, panellists. I hope that gives you an opportunity to get to know our panel a bit better and some of their challenges. I'm going to go to the audience, and our first question this afternoon comes from Alan Radley from Huddersfield. Alan. So can we have a mic, please?
So if I could take you back to Phil Dawson's talk from this morning. At one part of his presentation, he talks about a world where we'd have a third of our stuff in the native cloud, a third of our stuff hosted, and a third of our stuff would be on premises. So using that as an example, what do the panel think are the barriers to becoming more agile as an IT organisation?
Oh, now that's a good question. Who wants to take that one? Paula, you've moved a lot of stuff out into the cloud.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the question is more about how you change those percentages or how you become more agile. Because in our case, if it's not as a service, then it is in this private cloud data center. There's such a fractional amount on campus that in itself is not the determining factor as to whether we're agile or not. Agility really comes from a mindset change within your staff. It's when your staff stop thinking, I have to own this beast in all of its glory. When they can get beyond that and actually see that there's interesting work and lots of it to be done with the things that you are left with once you divest yourself of a data center or divest yourself of patching and owning servers. There's so much work to be done, because what institutions, mine anyway, values is actually, can we help solve business problems? They couldn't give a monkey's uncle about whether we patch our systems. They just assume that they're patched and they're working. They don't care about that. So for me, agility is not a definition of what percentages anywhere. It's more a mindset of your staff and whether they actually get where the business wants you to go.
Okay. Alison, you've shifted that one-third, because you've put all of it into Azure. Are you more agile as a result?
I think we've got a lot of work to do to be agile. We want to be agile. But some things, yeah, some of the stuff that we're doing now, we are more agile. I guess the thing, like having flexibility, and they mentioned like being able to like scale your systems up and stuff like that, I think that's made us more agile.
Okay, so it's coming.
Yeah.
Gary, from the vendor's point of view?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I listened to your talk with interest. In our experience, a one-size-fits-all solution tends to be the most expensive one to implement. And I wonder whether or not without your data center refresh in the mix of that environment, whether the cost model for that would have been justified. And I think the challenge that we see in most organizations is determining which elements go in which particular bucket, and looking at all of those various dependencies and trying to go through that process. And that's what takes the most amount of time and is often a constantly changing process. It might exist here in one instance and then need to move it somewhere else, and how you deal with that level of agility.
Okay, what do our audience think? What are the barriers to becoming more agile? Any comments? Peter, over there.
Thank you. Only really to reinforce Paula's message, and if you've still got staff that are hugging the tin, then they really are a barrier to agility. In my view, they need to, I suppose, get out more, and get really into the institution to understand what it is that people are looking for from their systems, from their services, to understand that, and then they can get on and move to a better service.
Okay, so that's a good point. We have a comment just behind.
I think one of the things for us is security. Internally, we kind of have a very simplistic model of security. We've got a firewall, it's okay. As soon as you look at moving that outside, you then want to have a more vigorous method of security, analysing that. And that takes time. And that can be quite complicated and gets stuck in lots of bits of the university because of bureaucracy. So that stops us being agile, I think, understanding the security of all the applications, how we move forward with that.
Richard, is security a barrier for you?
It is in a lot of ways. It's very interesting the point you made that inside your environment security is quite lax, because you can touch it, therefore it must be secure. Simple, lax. Well, as soon as you move something into someone else's pool, someone else's server, outside your control, all of a sudden people become very, very paranoid about that data, and rightfully so. So security is not necessarily a barrier, it is something that needs to be embraced and understood, and then implemented in the correct way. So we've got GDPR around the corner, which is going to be a mountain to climb, just as the data protection was several years ago. We are seeing more and more fresh attacks coming from different parts of the world. So security is very much in the forefront. The media is using it a lot more, and people are shying away from it or thinking it's too big, too complicated. Oh my God, I couldn't possibly do that. When actually it's not. It's a long road. It's not a 5-minute fix. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And that is something that needs to be understood and overcome, and the mentalities need to be changed. You need to accept that actually other people can do a better job than your own team in certain arenas.
We seem to be getting back to people again. Paul.
I have a data centre, and I expect your data centre. It weighs me on the way in after I've given them my passport twice for them to check that it's me, and it weighs me on the way out to make sure that I haven't picked up anything that I shouldn't. Actually, when you look at some of the providers' services, they are much more secure than we are able to provide. My concern about our security is often that we have staff who go off and think, I'll just buy one of those things. So it's not so much my data center internally. We have a very small space for some on-premise stuff. It's not the providers that I have contracted with, because I'm doing that GDPR questionnaire thing with each one of them. It's the ones that some academic might go off and just say, well, I'll have an ethics system. And you have no idea where they've put it. You have no idea what data's in it. You have no idea about the contract. And don't get me started on bits of Dropbox. And it's like, seriously,
Or Google
we
Drive.
worry about, some of our IT teams worry about the wrong things. We've got to look at what those users are doing first, because it's slightly twitchy.
And we're having to pay up to, 4% of our university turnover with GDPR if any of this stuff gets out. This starts to have real teeth.
Of global turnover, so I've got Malta, Dubai and Mauritius as well to add into that mix.
I can see why you're worried now. I want to go back to a point that was made earlier, Paula, by you, and a comment from Peter Tinson. And I think the best way to do this is to bring in our second question, actually. And our second question this afternoon comes from Carl Grocott from Leeds.
It's got too much stuff.
I'm just wondering, won't the IT staff that we currently have basically defend their own territory and want to keep everything on site?
So the question is, what about our own IT staff defending their territory, basically just trying to keep everything in-house? Because, they're going to lose their job, they're going to... I was going to say, give Alison a turn here, because you're now using Microsoft staff, aren't you?
Yeah.
Or are you?
Yeah, well, we had that challenge, but it was kind of, we were under restructure, and that's how I'll kind of put it into that perspective. It's like seeing the opportunities of and what you'll do differently. Now, some of the guys really jumped on the bus and saw the different things, the different world, and all those exciting things they can do. Some didn't, and maybe the ones that are hugging the tin, maybe that's what you call them. But some are no longer with us, kind of thing, and have gone off to do other things from their world. But the guys that we, there was some resistance when we did that project, but the restructure kind of sorted that out.
Can I ask you, Alison, though, because you said that two things were going on in parallel in your talk. You said Staffordshire was reorganising, from the top-down change, plus you were doing this project. Did one drive the other, or would you have gone through a complete reorganisation, having gone with the outsourcing to Azure anyway?
I think we would have done it anyway. It wasn't good to do both at the same time, but now that we've come through the project and that's there anyway, it's done, kind of thing. So we can now just settle into our new world. So, it wasn't an ideal thing to do both, but now, looking back, I'm glad it's done.
Okay. Gary, what do the suppliers think of this? Are we all going to be out of business? Are we all, you can take all of our jobs away?
No, I don't think so. I'm not aware of any organisations that have either moved from a sort of horizontal to a vertical style deployment of IT, or from a on-premise to off-premise, that have really lost a lot of staff. And you have to present it in the way that you would with any IT change. It's an opportunity for the staff to get skilled in more relevant areas. And there are those staff that will embrace that, and there are those staff that won't. But it's not a question of, we don't need you anymore because this is in the cloud. It's the same stuff in a different place. It needs the same amount of managing and work to keep it running. It's just a question of saying, am I going to get on board with the new skills that are required in the modern world, or am I not? And everyone responds to that according to their own ways.
We didn't reduce our headcount in IT as part of the restructure for the cloud. It got slightly bigger, but we sort of brought in some from in faculties, but we didn't by any means sort of shrink down just because we're going to the cloud.
I'm thinking back again to one of this morning's talks, and the idea of us all becoming turtles and having that soft underbelly of people skills. Paula, are your staff changing?
I personally think that's an essential change. What the business wants are people who can bridge the gap between the supplier and the technical knowledge and the end user. There needs to be a bridge, and if it's somebody who works for the business, they should understand the business too. So for me, the big change I want in my staff is to be that internal consultant, rather than to be thoroughly techie and not understand the nature of the business. So absolutely, that's what I need from my future staff.
What do you think? Are we at risk? Are our staff holding us back? Are we holding ourselves back? Any comments? And by the way, if you don't want to be brave enough to take the microphone, you can tweet your comments if you're on Twitter. Matt here is very kindly going to pass me any tweets. I've got Twitter in front of me, but I can't guarantee I'll always read them all. Any thoughts on that? Are our staff going to hold us back? Are they the sort of the more fragility side of becoming agile?
Can I chip in while they're thinking about it? One of the things that we need are people with a better understanding of contract management, service management. So there are different skills. So as well as having that internal consultant, for me now, there are so many contracts in play. And some of them, they have this, You know, if you go through an EU procurement process, they come up every 5 years, and you might be able to push it out for another 2. But they start aligning like buses. So, you know, this year it might be the desktop, next year it might be the server, the year after it might be something else. And so if you don't have that capability around contract and service management, you will end up being unable to cope with that environment.
I think that's a very good point. It'd be interesting just to see a show of hands, actually. How many of you have dedicated IT procurement or contract specialists in your organisations? Yeah, it's not that many. It's only about less than a quarter, I would say. Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Can I ask a supplemental question then? How many of those procurement people would you describe as business enablers or business blockers? For those that have they fall into one of 2 camps, I find.
I think that goes...
Don't answer, that's best not to answer.
That goes right back to, though, that question about, you know, what skills do you need and what kind of procurement? Because I'm sure some of you, and you don't have to answer this question in an open forum, but I'm sure some of you will not be thinking too favourably about your central procurement teams because they're not enabling and they are saying, no, no, no. Richard, I'm conscious you haven't had a chance to answer that question about...
So I was going to come at it from a slightly different view, which is probably going to collect a lot of the comments that were made. When you put your services onto a cloud or into a different platform, you're swapping one bucket for another bucket. You will have problems that will just be different in nature. You will need those contract managers. You will need those enablers within the business who can actually go and talk as human beings, not binary, to the business themselves. And your average technological person doesn't always understand or appreciate that. And there is a journey for them to take in terms of developing themselves, so going back to the tortoise, of developing those soft aspects. And it's very important, it's something I've done with my teams, to actually give them a common language. So I've picked up my entire team of techs and actually put them onto project management courses, not to turn them into project managers, but for them to actually understand what the stakeholder was, what the boards were for, what all the different meanings of those words were. And those are the kind of developments we need to put into our technical people. At no point are they actually going to be diminished, in my view. I don't think we're going to sit there and go, put everything in the cloud and get rid of that entire team. No. It's put everything in the cloud, here's a new bucket of problems, I need to upskill those people to go and do that. And we will lose people along the way. That's just the nature of business. They will move on to other companies, they might be happier, they might not be happy, but people will move around. Long gone are the days where people sit in the same job for 20, 25 years. The longest I ever served in a single company is 5 years. And that's pretty much normal from what I'm seeing of all the recruitment I'm doing.
I think there's also a challenge for us to make sure that the business doesn't think that just because they've moved it to the cloud, that they can cut through swathes of staff, because my experience is you can't. It takes managing. Okay? It might make you more agile in many other ways, but you cannot. If they think, they being managers in the university, think that just by moving it to there, that it will save them a whole load of stuff. Actually, they're completely wrong. And you will find yourself under-resourced and in a real problem.
And you can't come back from that as well. Because if you end up in that situation, the clock is ticking, the contracts are running out, you'll have to renew at some point. If they know that you're in a bad position, you'll get punitive rates. Yeah. And you actually don't have the staff or the ability to flip that around and come back in-house. You've effectively lost the entire war.
So, we've talked a lot about staff. Let's talk a little bit about users. What do they care about all of this? I mean, are they agile? Are they holding us back? Do they care? As they move into, you know, a consumer-driven, sort of device-centric, app-centric world, what do our students think? What do our customers think? Alison?
Well, they shouldn't see any different. They shouldn't know any different if they're using systems, whether they're in Azure, whether they're on premise. It shouldn't be a different experience for them. And that was one of our, that was one of our challenges, to make sure it wasn't.
Gary?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the staff to a degree, but certainly students coming into university now, are used to a level of IT usage that has not been seen before, and so their expectation of IT requirement when they come into an organisation is already at a very, very high level. They expect everything to be instant, they expect everything to be online, they expect to be available at all times, and because of the way that universities are funding and the way that they're moving forward, I feel, as I see it, we're constantly playing catch up with that process, and that's the challenge really. The user demand is always much higher than the ability of the organisation to deliver to those users. And it's a constant game of catch-up.
And I think we heard a really good example from Oracle, of all people, sorry Oracle, this morning just before lunch, of just how agile you could be in a very technologically sort of challenging project and environment. So I think the challenge is there. Richard?
So I have a slightly, I agree with all the views, but I don't view them as two different buckets. I don't think that the online service should be superior to the in-house one and vice versa. I'm always reminded of electricity and water and Wi-Fi and mobile signals. It doesn't actually matter when you turn the tap and the water falls. You don't actually sit there and go, well done water company, you've done a sterling job, I've got some water, fantastic. If that water stops, however, you'll be on the phone going, what the hell? Come on, what's going on? I'm paying for this. And our end users, whether they be staff, student, researchers, or anyone else, kind of have that view of the service that we offer. So every time we give off a new service, so every time we bring on a new implementation, for the first couple of weeks, about, oh wow, this is brilliant, this is new. And then it becomes mundane. But they expect it. They expect that level. So in a year's time, they expect the same thing again at a strict minimum, preferably a bit better. And actually what we're doing is a bit of a race against our own services. We have to be better next year than we are this year. And we have to constantly innovate and move forward. And I see that where the agility is. Whether it's a cloud offering or it's an in-house offering is actually irrelevant. The offering is actually what's important.
You have just said what the users care about is the service level, and that's absolutely the case. But there's an interesting point here. I mean, you've got Dell off in the presentation somewhere else. When we went out to tender, you chose us, yeah, but when we went out to tender, we did not name a brand. We did not say this server has to be like this. We simply said we want this service level and this capacity. And so whilst our users are looking at service level, and they probably would have some concern if you put BBC computers out on the desks for them to use, unless they were historians, there is some level of quality that students do expect and that staff do expect. But by and large, I think the days of us being driven by brand, unless you're a Mac user, are passing. And certainly, people like me, I have no interest in EMC storage or anybody else's storage. I'm only interested in the service level. And so I do think it's important for us to understand what it is that does motivate them. It might be an Apple brand, but it probably isn't between a Dell and a Lenovo. I don't think that they care. They measure themselves by their home experience, not, and possibly what their school experience was in some cases, and then they come and find us wanting. So I think that there are important measures for us to stack up against, but they are changing.
So let's just develop that. Oh, sorry, we've got a question. Dan.
Dan Perry, University of Manchester. Just want to pick up on something so Adrian, you said when you talked about users, students. Richard, you talked about staff, researchers. Mm-hmm. The bit which comes through to me and isn't picked up here is a major limitation I think we've got is the digital literacy of our staff. Particularly for University of Manchester, I'm finding a load of staff who've been there an incredibly long time, really good at their jobs, but if I throw Office 365 in front of them, they're not going to get any benefit from it. They're not going to understand it. So whilst you may be able to accelerate your implementation, and students may be able to accelerate their adoption of everything, you've got this massive group who are the people who are actually doing the stuff in the organisation. And from a transformation implementation point of view, I don't know how to get them in the right place where they can actually benefit from this. So just to kind of feedback and any observations you may have.
Yeah. So I'll pick this one up. We're currently looking at customer personas inside the IT of Southampton to actually answer that question in part is what do our end users actually look like, whether they be staff, students, and where is that knowledge gap? And what I've been finding more and more in the projects that are crossing my desk is I'm now seeing training elements. I'm actually seeing communications being mapped out in the business case, going, well, we're going to bring online service Wibble, for example, and it's going to have all of these changes. Whereas once upon a time, it's going to be, we're just going to bring this online. But now these changes and these items are then starting to have been plugged into our communications department, being plugged into our internal training department, which was regenerated recently. And we're seeing more and more investments internally. So we're leveraging our own university skills to create our training material to then go out and train people. And that's how we're addressing that particular part. And there's other aspects of it as well. You'll have people who will adopt it a lot faster than other ones. People will be resistant to it. And all of that is part of that communications of actually delivering the message to them, going, we're not doing this to you. We are doing this with you. And that is another message that's been coming down from the VC very loud and clear for the last year or so. We're no longer working against the university or doing things to the university. We are doing things with them, with our colleagues, having the open communications, listening to their feedbacks. It's very easy as a technical group of people to go, this is easy to understand, I don't know what your problem is. But it's very easy as well for the researchers that are currently sequencing DNA to say the exact same thing back to us. Don't know why you don't get this, it's really easy. We need to bridge that gap, is that common language again.
Gary, how can the supplier side help us with this?
Yeah, I would say the same thing really. It's a question of getting the communication through the organisation so that the end goal and the steps that you're taking are understood by all the people that are going on the journey with you. Because if they're not bought into the vision and the strategy of what you're trying to do, then they're going to be resistant to the change that strategy creates. So only by that level of communication, possibly through utilising the HR department to work with them and bring them on board with you. That's what I would say.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial and I'll let Paula come in, but
That could be a bit controversial.
you know, I'll ask the audience actually. How many of you had training on how to use, if you use it, Facebook? How many of you had training for using your online banking application? How many of you had training on using your student record information management system, if you use it? So I mean, you know, I think it's a very...
I know lots of people who can't use any of those.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd also say that whilst none of us have formal training in any of those things, we've all experienced a friend telling us how to do that certain thing in Facebook or that, you know, whatever those other systems are. So in a sense there is training, but it's kind of social training that people teach each other.
So why can't we do that in our own institutions? Go on, Paula. You can...
I'm struggling with exactly the same point that Dan made. There used to be IT training. There used to be Word and Excel, and people came in. And then academics said, I don't really want to do this. It's a complete waste of my time. And so the university dropped down to a 0.4 FTE for IT training, and that was it. And now they're struggling with Office 365. I think that I'm going to be more controversial than you, which is like they should come. I think we should just say at recruitment, these are the competencies, these are the core competencies you should have, and we're not recruiting you if you don't. And if I were a Dell employee, I would be made to turn up at a workshop once a year and be briefed on all the latest updates. And I would be expected to know those things before I walked out that room. And if I didn't know them, that would actually be some sort of performance-related issue for me. Right now, I think we're letting our students down because you get students who have a fantastic experience with one academic and a really rubbish experience with another. And largely because of their competence with IT, you have all sorts of other problems in the organisation. And I think we need to be brave enough to say, actually, there's a required level of competency for these roles, and it looks like this. And if you can't match up to it, then you shouldn't be employed.
Isn't that a function of HR review? Anyway?
HR, just cop out of it. They dump you on IT.
I only say that in the fact that people need to, there's an annual review process. And
I know, but they
it's
just
driven by
pass
that.
It's HR, it's a university organisation thing. They pass the buck to somewhere else. It's okay.
I'm not going to do a show of hands as to what you think of your HR department. But I did notice we have one question or comment at the front. Just
back really and say, how many people can use the entire Azure or AWS stack without any training? And how long would it take our researchers, a small percentage of whom can use that, how long would it take them all to get to that point if we don't actually step in and help with that?
I'm not saying there should be nothing, okay? But we should be requiring staff and setting out courses that help staff do those things and requiring their attendance where that's deemed an appropriate response. Clearly not Facebook.
I'm just saying, not everything's Facebook, is it? And sometimes there are genuine compute resources that researchers could make use of that really do need training.
No, and I think that's a well-made point. I'm going to just shift this slightly because I'm conscious of time, and it is Lee and the panel standing between you and drinks a little later on. We were talking about students and their experience, and this morning we heard from Gartner, it's all about integration. Now, I've got a question here, and it comes from Arthur Clune from York. Some of you may know Arthur. He can't be with us, unfortunately, today, but he definitely wants this question to be answered, which is, will we ever be able to integrate our student record system, those horrible, his words, those horrible business systems into the cloud? Will we ever be able to deliver that sort of application simplicity that our students are used to with whatever app that they're used to using? Is it possible? Richard, is it possible?
I don't see why not. At the end of the day, they're just technologies. That's all they are. There is nothing impossible in data migrations or integration. It might be hard, it might take a while, but nothing is actually impossible. We're just moving text from one arena to another arena. It's the achievement of it is actually where the question is, and how do you control it, and more importantly, how do you use it? So you end up actually looking at your back ends, and instead of having, and I'm assuming everyone in the room is the same, data here, 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 and then multiple copies of it around the place as well, because that one, and that one is actually the authoritative of all the other ones, but all copy of each other. As long as you get a data lake in the middle, so a nice, big, authoritative, clean, and good piece of data, from there you can go and put it into and mine it into whatever you want.
Paula, authoritative and clean. Does that describe your data landscape? I know it's not mine.
It's not mine either.
Embarrassingly, I've been at my university for a very long time. And what I've witnessed is that each year, maybe not each year, but fairly frequently, they have changed the academic regulations in some way or other. But they have, because you don't shut the university, let all the students go and then change the regulations, you do it in flight, as it were. You have students on different regulations, potentially, and certainly in your system if you're keeping any historic data. So that makes it really difficult sometimes to achieve the simplicity and this lovely interface that students might desire. You're left with complicated rules and regulations, all delivered by systems. So if you want an enterprise service bus, you probably could get something lovely and beautiful and knitted together, but to present it in an application, to make it so simple to users to consume, like a Facebook, you really underestimate how nitty and gritty and revolting some of the complexities behind those student systems are.
So we've gone from authoritative and clean to revolting in about a minute. Gary, what do you think? Are we ever going to be able to make these things happen?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sitting in for the chap from AWS, whose name I've forgotten, Ed, wasn't it? That's what you call it. It's up to you. So if you ask a cloud provider, will a cloud service be available in the future, they will always give the same answer, which is yes. and the question that you look at it and say, well, yes, it's possible, but would you want to, and how difficult are the steps? So depending on the timescale, will it ever be possible? Yes. Will you ever want to do it? Not necessarily.
Well, that's an interesting one. Comment from Ian.
Yeah, I actually think this mic isn't working. Maybe it is.
It is now.
I think that's maybe not right. I think universities should be thinking about differentiating factors. And I think that when services like Office 365, Scientia, whatever your cloud-based service might be, you're using at university, at your institution, you're probably thinking about, well, what can I do that makes my student experience different from another badge? Because that's really one of the things that will stick with your students, I think. So I think universities, they're lining themselves up to think about adding value beyond simply those web-based or cloud-based services, are probably going to be able to offer things that maybe some of the other institutions are not able to do. And I think that is an important thing that we should be thinking about building on top of an infrastructure. So you're talking about ESPs, you're talking about how do we expose services to consumers. Consumers should be getting the British Airways experience. It's British Airways, it's not British Airways Finance, it's not British Airways whatever, different departments. They're getting a single experience. And I think that's hugely, hugely important from a consumer's perspective, quite honestly.
But I think you might end up wrapping around your student system all of these nice, easy interfaces, but the gubbins in the middle is what I'm saying, might still be something you might not wish to expose to an end user.
Yeah. But then,
Exactly. They don't expose the gubbins to the end user. They don't want the gubbins. They want what you described, Adrian, which was the simple facility of online enrolment or powered by examinations or notifications, user-centered communications and an experience that's based around their life cycle through the institution. I think the only way to do that is to present that in that unified form.
So a bit like the banks have done, because they present us all these great mobile apps, but underpinning it all is some horrible COBOL database that was written in the 1970s.
It will back to the water and the electricity and services.
Okay, I'm conscious we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask if there are any final questions or comments from the audience for our panel. We've got probably a minute or two at most. Anybody want to ask the panel anything? Looks like we're done. In which case, can I say thank you very much indeed to Paula Vickers, to Alison Phillips, to Gary Rawlings, and to Richard Ray. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of IQT for this year. There is a possibility, I'm not going to cast this in stone, that we might see you next time in Crewe. But until then, it's good night from them and it's good night from me. Good night.